from time to time, because the South African Reserve Bank as well as National Treasury are expected to hold a conference sometime in March, hopefully, seeking to find ways to lower the country's inflation goals. South Africa has been stable, with an inflation averaging around 2.9% in the last few months of 2024. It currently sits at around 3% as well. The Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, previously said that a single-point target of between 3 and 6% would be more favorable, and in turn then decrease interest rates. Now, just to give you some insight on this as well then, in February 2000, is pretty much when the South African Reserve Bank, or rather National Treasury, put forward the suggestion and the adoption of inflation targeting. That ultimately meant that in order to keep prices as stable as possible, the Reserve Bank needs to ensure that they increase or decrease interest rates based on inflation and where it currently sits. If it is between 3 and 6%, it was considered to be a good thing, and that is where you'd maintain stability. If it was higher than 6%, you'd look to increase interest rates in order to bring down inflation. If it was lower than 3%, you could then ultimately cut interest rates, drive spending, and ultimately raise the inflation rate a little bit to hopefully still sit between that 3 to 6% target band. There are positives and there are negatives to all of this. Let's discuss it and what would be best for South Africa as we revise this inflation target. Chief Economist at Consultancy Group, Chifipa Mhango, joining us now. Chifipa, did I say anything wrong? Did I explain that correctly?
No, you did perfectly, 100%.
Yeah? Does that hopefully, I hope that keeps everybody in the loop with the conversation. Let's discuss your thought processes. And I want to do that off the back of a speech by the late Tito Mboweni that he made in September 2003, shortly after we had put this all in. He says, the target range of 3 to 6% was set as an ambitious one. And while there may be debates today about whether the target range was set at the correct level, it is important to note that for both the credibility of the central bank, as well as the management of expectations in respect of inflation being a problem, the target had been set to a level which would properly demonstrate commitment to lowering inflation. Has it achieved that job?
Well, I think, Patrick, it has achieved in the point of view that we've been have a stable macroeconomic environment in terms of the monetary policy side of things. Yeah. I think the ability to communicate effectively on the point of view of the basis of what you're trying to achieve in the economy, I think brings element of certainty in the markets. So we are coming from a quite evolving environment when it comes to monetary policy in the country. For some of us with advantage of age, we can give you a history that, for instance, before that we had what we call monetary aggregates targeting, where we're looking at money supply. We also coming from an environment where we had twin currencies, where we, in terms of exchange rate, the one which was traded by the banks and the one which was traded also by those doing exports and importing into the country. Those are two different exchange rates we had. So we are coming from an environment of looking at situations, reality of the economy, and how that can be adjusted in the point of view of the changes that the economies are facing.
But this was stable, right? This provided stability. It just perhaps didn't necessarily aid the growth prospect, or did it? Because it meant that because you know where things are going to lie with regards to inflation, hopefully, you now know what you need to do from a fiscal policy perspective, from the point of view of National Treasury.
Well, I think that's what they guide us in terms of the framework was actually trying to achieve that stability. But I think, to me, I'll bring the debate around the issue that, what did it achieve? Yes, it did achieve on the aspects of inflation targeting or trying to bring that price stability in the country. But there are other issues in terms of where the debate now goes to say, is that the only thing we want to achieve in the economy? Some of us wrote an article in 2006 following to the aspect of inflation targeting, where I did indicate the issues about monetary policy must be debated. I think the issues of concern was around whether we were looking at broadly on the economic perspective, for example, the GDP growth in the country, the unemployment numbers in the country, and so forth. So when we are trying to move towards a new way of doing things from the inflation targeting point of view, I think we always have to look at the realities of our own economy. So it's not always appropriate to say, let's just do a copy and paste approach because it's being done in other advanced economies.
Sure.
So the realities of our own economy in terms of how we are able to grow the economy from the current low base to, let's say, high levels, which we are trying to achieve, which is above 5% per se. I think we need to be also very careful in terms of looking at the real situation that we're facing in the country, because monetary policy has got implications towards other industries.
Yes.
So, for instance, the vehicle industry, the housing market, all depend in terms of the monetary policy environment.
But here's my question then. If we move around with regards to inflation targeting, with regards to maybe lowering the inflation target, number one, I actually don't know, would you prefer that they lower the inflation target or raise it, or just do away with inflation targeting completely?
I think, to me, it's a debate which we have to really have a proper dialogue.
Yeah.
I don't think it's only the Reserve Bank's decision to take this approach.
Yes.
I think there have to be processes that have been of engagement. Maybe
I suppose it was never their own decision, right? It was given to them by National Treasury, which is government.
That's the thing. But realistically, I think the NEDLAC process has to kick in there in that space. So much as they can be instructed to say, maybe this is the approach.
Yes.
If you ask me to say, what should we do, whether this is the right thing or not, I think to me, I would rather take an approach to say, let's interrogate this matter better to understand the implications and how this will actually impact other industries per se. Because you don't want to have a situation whereby you lower the target level to say, let's say, like other countries, which is 2%, for example, in the US or Euro area or UK, they look at 2%. And then we say, okay, let's do the same thing to say 2%. Can we really have an economy where our inflation rate is around 2%? And what if the inflation rate is always, let's say, above 4.5% per se? What does that mean in terms of decision-making process?
Yeah. But they have a dual mandate, the US, right? So they also have to worry about the unemployment rate. We don't necessarily have that for the Reserve Bank here.
Yeah.
So my question then becomes, if we're ultimately going to change what the South African Reserve Bank needs to look at when it comes to inflation, or what level that inflation rate needs to be at, and we keep changing it, takes away stability, which, as you said, can't be the only thing we achieve. But it does ultimately mean that investors aren't sure in which direction our economy goes into, because it moves as a target consistently. When one thinks of the communication that the Reserve Bank has had in trying to create the midpoint of 3 to 6 being significant, they did that over a few meetings as well, and ultimately the market then got used to it. But it's going to be that slowness of having to communicate the message. Is it not going to be difficult for us to change it?
No, I don't think it will be difficult, Arabia. As I said, the historic aspect is that no policy is permanent.
Yes.
We always have to revolve around the issue that we're facing in the economy. However, if you look at the inflation targeting, it has been there for most over 20 years.
Yes.
That means that it has created an element of certainty in the markets, per se. Now, there's nothing wrong in terms of saying, okay, we've had this policy for over, let's say, 25 years or so. Is it working for the country? There's nothing wrong having that kind of debate. But I agree with you when you said, if the changes are frequent. So if we say, okay, the current way we want to do is something we want to project for the economy, let's say in the next 20 years, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think the frequency is what matters. So realistically, we've had a history of keeping our policy environment stable.
Does a lower inflation target change the scope for National Treasury? Because then they feel like, well, we just need the public spending more, which, yes, will increase inflation, according to Economics 101, but it means that we have more money in terms of taxes, and hopefully then we can use that more money to buy things, when ultimately, as a country, we have more debt, actually, and that's the highest growing part of our budget.
Well, there's what we call target and reality on the ground. Those are two different things. So much as we can lower our target to 3%, the question is to say, okay, now, can we achieve that in the long run, in the point of view of the challenges we're facing in the economy? So I think currently I can say, we're doing well. I mean, the inflation rate is around 3% in terms of the latest numbers. Can we maintain that with the challenges we're facing in the economy? We're going through budget processes now. Some of us are concerned about certain things like sin taxes. Off air, we're discussing about the sugar tax.
Indeed,
all those things bring elements of cost into the in the economy. We've had ESCOM increasing the tariffs by the latest figures, the percentage which they got. all those have got implication towards inflation in the economy. We've got labor unions who are requesting or putting proposals for increases in wages of above the inflation.
Yeah.
So all those elements will give us direction to say what happens then next. So I think it's a battle which we also have to make sure there will be challenges, but I think it's something that will be won.
Isn't the reason why we're so strict about this because South Africa is mainly a price taker as opposed to a price giver? When you look at things like oil, we don't have a choice.
We don't.
We take it at whatever level that is at, and we first have to convert our money into dollars, so the dollar exchange rate affects us. Then we take those dollars and buy oil at whatever price is ultimately set in the market, dependent on what OPEC feels, for most part, OPEC plus with Russia. But is that not the key reason why we need to be a little bit more strict? Because we get so impacted by everything that happens around the world.
Well, I think it's a fair view in terms of how we approach our situation. I think there's so many number of issues that actually will impact us in terms of how we make our decisions. So I think you're quite right in terms of the issue of exchange rate. They all come in terms of feeding into our import side of the inflation basket that we actually look at. I mean, if you look at our trade composition, in some products we actually got a negative trade balance for years. So it's also about revisiting our trade approach to ensure that most of the products, I think, per se, especially the industrial side, we can turn around the situation in the point whereby we can have a positive trade balance.
Sure.
All those elements, I think, come into play in terms of how the direction of our policy from the monetary side point of view is actually crafted.
Chifipa, what happens to our currency if we decide to lower the inflation target? Let's just say we're just giving a hypothetical, 3% is the mark that government and national and the Reserve Bank target. What happens to the currency? Does it get weaker? By how much?
I don't think it will get weaker. I'm of the view that the market will look at it from the point of view of the historical patterns that the Reserve Bank has actually been following with regard to the policy decision. So whether they put at 3%, whether they put at 4%, the issue is about how that policy gets implemented. So 100%. I don't think it will have any issues around the currency.
I think and how it gets communicated.
Yes, I think it will be very key as well.
Perfect. Chifipa, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. I think it's a fascinating discussion. Of course, bread and butter for some of us as well, including yourself. So really appreciate getting into this one for us then. Chifipa Mhango is the Chief Economist at Consultancy Group.